The summer had been a promise I'd kept to myself for 10 years. A thin, stubborn promise like a lighthouse I kept returning to in my head whenever life felt all rush and no shore. I had built the trip in slow increments. A glossy brochure dog-eared with notes, a travel agent's office where I drank 2 strong coffee and asked 10,000 small questions, a spreadsheet with cabin numbers and excursion options that I updated at 2 in the morning, because the rest of the world was finally asleep, and mine felt suddenly urgent. "You deserve it," my sister said when she saw the booking confirmation, as though the $48,000 was some sort of talisman I needed just to sleep. I told her, with a half-laugh, that at my age I was buying a promise of light and salt air and a son that didn't ask questions. Austin, 63. Bones a little stiff, hair salt and pepper in a way that matched the leather of my favorite jacket. Retired, they called it, the polite fiction. I had eased out of corporate life with a handshake and a portfolio and more friends than I needed. My real life had been quieter. A modest house on a cul-de-sac, a garden with stubborn tomatoes, a granddaughter named Leela who drew me portraits in purple crayon. I was not rich in the way tabloid people were rich. But I had money enough for the sort of thing the brochure promised: 3 weeks of gentle luxury across the Mediterranean, a private balcony, a menu that listed truffles like they were punctuation marks. I booked it for the family. For what else do we hoard time if not to hand it out to the people we say we love? My daughter, Kate, insisted she couldn't go, she had work she couldn't drop. My sister waved her hand and said she'd think about it. My son, Ethan, grinned in the way that had once been my mirror. "Dad," he said that night when I told him first, the phone hot between us, "this is incredible. We'll make memories." He said it in the kind of voice that translates easily to "thanks, Dad," and I took the thanks like bread. Weeks of planning passed, and then suddenly it was July, and the day was an all-white glare on the pier, the harbor full of yawning gulls and men with clipped smiles. My suit was sharper than I felt. The sun made my shoulders ache in a friendly, embarrassing way. Ethan drove us to the terminal. He played music I liked and joked about the buffet. The last thing I expected was the shape of a betrayal that fit in the hollow between his shirt and his tie. At the check-in counter, the attendant frowned, thumbed a tablet, and repeated the words like he'd rehearsed them for awkwardness. "Sir, I'm showing only one ticket under the family booking." A polite pause. "We need everyone present at check-in. I'm sorry." My pulse went somewhere warm and slow, the kind of moment you rewrite in your head a dozen times, never properly touching the edges of what's happening. Ethan's face slackened like a curtain. He looked at me with that strange slowness some people use when they're about to unveil a magic trick. "Oh, I forgot to buy your ticket," he said, and it wasn't the embarrassed child voice I'd heard when he broke a lamp at 6. It was clipped, practiced. "Enjoy your stay at home, Dad." 100 little ordinary things happened fast after that. The clerk's apology, a woman with a badge giving me the nearest phone number to the travel agent. People offered help with sympathetic smiles. Ethan smiled, the one that never reached his eyes anymore, and put an arm around my shoulder like a prop for public grief. Cameras blinked. A couple of tourists whispered. The sun, monstrous and unsympathetic, made every humiliation bright as noon. I could have stormed the counter, taken what was mine by force, demanded the manager's head on the spot. Instead, I felt something I later understood was steadier than fury, a hot, slow clarity. You do not let the day's weather decide the shape of the rest of your life. I watched him walk toward the gangway, his figure already dissolving into a crowd of luggage and laminated maps. I sat on a bench heavy with the city's indifferent noises and felt the hot metal of envy and the colder iron of betrayal press in. Families paraded by with matching hats. Bobbies laughed like unruly bells. An elderly couple kissed, and all of the images fed into the ache. I had spent $48,000 to make a promise to myself and my family. They would keep the trip. I would keep the memory, the receipt, the itinerary, a stack of reservations and bookings, and a ledger of intention. But at that moment, I also made another promise in the silence between my teeth. I would not be erased with a two-word line and a borrowed grin. 2 weeks. 2 weeks is long enough to change a weekday's weather into a month's memory. The next morning, I started with small things. I called the agent and asked about cancellation policies, not because I intended to cancel, but because knowledge is a shape that protects you. I took a slow walk to the old library, sat in the corner where the light falls through glass, and read the law column in the paper until I knew which phrases made lawyers look up from their coffee. The legal world can seem like a town of strangers, but when you begin to speak the language, subpoenas, affidavits, proof of intent, it turns into a ladder you can climb out of humiliations. I called my friend Rosa, who had been a paralegal for 30 years and kept a soft tie to justice in the quiet way she sorted other people's pain into folders. "They can't do that," she said simply. "To buy the trip and then treat your presence as disposable, there's misrepresentation there, and there's malice if he did it on purpose." Her words felt like a serviceable map. She recommended a name, Marissa Cole, a lawyer who owed the world no patience for men with louder suits. I called Marissa, and she asked 2 questions that smelled like battle plans. Did I want apology or accountability? And did I want them to think I was bluffing? I met Marissa in a coffee shop that smelled like new books and lemon peel. She was younger than I expected and older than I needed. She had the sort of eyes that make you skip sentences, direct, quick, not in a hurry to be kind. When I folded my itineraries onto the table between us, she didn't flinch. "He wanted to erase you from the trip," she asked. She did not ask why I had paid. She did not say make due apologies. She asked what I wanted. "Justice," I told her. "Not the cardboard version with press statements, but the kind that leaves papers burning through a man's control." "If he planned this, we can show intent," she said. "Text messages, witness statements, the booking timeline. If there's evidence he omitted your name deliberately to shame or profit, that's not merely a family spat. It's actionable." Her mouth arranged the words into a surgical statement. "We'll also make sure the cruise line knows. They have obligations. If the booking was misrepresented at check-in, there's cause for restitution." She took the case that afternoon. A retainer went from my account with a familiar ache. It felt like the same currency that purchased the booking, now buying back my presence in a different ledger: respect. For a week we pulled strings with the mechanical precision of people who'd done this before. Texts were subpoenaed, phone records unearthed. The travel agency produced the transaction receipts. Ethan had reserved 2 cabins under his account. He had, the paperwork would later show, added my name but removed it at the last minute. A slender thread of deceit, only visible to those who knew to look. But the real fracture showed up in the small things. A photo from the port security footage where Ethan's body language was a precise kindergartner's imitation of regret. A receipt for a call he made from his car to someone in a voice that was too hurried to be honest. A dozen micro gestures that, when placed together, made a portrait of coordinated erasure. A twist that none of us had anticipated came from the cruise line itself. They disliked bad press. They prided themselves on luxury and the illusion of perfect family happiness. Marissa, who I liked more and more with every measured step, had a friend in the compliance office, a woman with an uncomfortable affection for justice named Lourdes. Lourdes dug into the internal camera footage, the internal chat logs. She found a message, not quite direct but enough to make a shape. A text from Ethan to a friend boasting about how easy it would be to keep Dad home this summer. It was the sort of malignant small talk people make when they imagine themselves clever. It smelled like intent. When I saw the message on my phone, a screenshot Marissa had taken, tiny gray text like a blade, the room tuned down around me. There is a peculiar sick tenderness that comes when something that hurt becomes anything like true. It is a perfection of pain. You can almost measure it. I told myself this mattered because it was proof, and because it was proof that could be used to prevent someone else's erasure. The $48,000 that had been a promise of waves and sunlight had morphed into a ticket to fight back. In the weeks that followed, we did not shout. We filed papers. We sent letters to the travel agency and the cruise. We demanded recompense not for our comfort but for misrepresentation, emotional distress, and punitive damages. I did not want to destroy my son. I wanted the truth to be a ledger he could no longer ignore. Marissa told me the law does not like cruelty masked as a family affair. When money and intent combine with humiliation, it becomes a shade of abuse that courts take seriously. On the second Monday after the pier, Ethan called my house and left a message. His voice was a machine trying to apologize, a machine without a soul. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think," he started, and then the line scratched into the white noise of thin excuses. I let the message sit in the machine like a slow stain. We set the date. The initial hearing was small and technical and not dramatic the way the movies make it. We read filings. We noted motions. A clerk stamped the paper with her thumb like a punctuation mark. The legal world moves like weather on a continent, inexorable, enormous. Yet in its particular way, it also moves like knitting, one small stitch at a time until a garment appears. On day 14, the same day Ethan had texted my granddaughter picture messages from the ship with stomach-clenching cliches like, "Missing you already, Grandpa," the travel agency called to offer a settlement. They wanted to avoid bad press. They offered a refund for the ticketing fees, a voucher, an apology letter penned as though they had been generous. I told Marissa what they offered and she laughed, a sound like a pair of scissors opening. "We do not take their first offer," she told me. "It's a stub of conciliation. We need a public version of their regret." So we demanded it. We asked the agency for a full refund, a public apology, and a clause forbidding anyone involved from repeating a similar act. We asked the cruise to release their internal policy notes and to sign an amendment that guaranteed equitable check-in policies for older travelers. The small things, the clauses, the formalities, they shaped the real world where other grandfathers might be saved from standing alone on benches, humiliated while the sea sails away. It was then, 2 weeks after the pier, in an office smelling of lemon and paper and a sort of dangerous, brittle righteousness, that everything we had assembled came into focus. Marissa printed the final packet and placed it in a dark folder, edges silver, and then looked at me with that expression I now recognized as a signature of allies. "Do you want to do this quietly?" she asked. "Or do you want it where everyone can see?" I thought of the photo Ethan had posted from the balcony of that ship, of the hashtags, the forced smiles. I thought of the bench and the way the sun had made the world stop sympathetic. "I want everyone to see," I said. When the first notice went out, the travel office called my phone and said something like, "We're so sorry," and the company's press pipeline readied itself with that oily apology smell. The cruise offered a line about family values in their official statement. Ethan, watching from somewhere in a sunscreen haze and cocktail shading of his own making, did not yet know the web tightening around him. He would soon. When people ask me now if I felt vindictive that summer, I pause. There is a line between vindication and justice that is easy to cross if your heart is a kettle on a burner. I wasn't after spectacle. I was after dignity. But dignity sometimes looks like the exact thing people call posturing. 2 weeks can change a man's summer and the lines he lives by. For me, those days changed how I would be seen for the last quarter of my life.
2 weeks after the pier and a storm of paperwork, the summer settled into a strange, waiting hush. My phone buzzed with the kind of calls you answer with your throat clenched, reporters hedging for nuance, the travel agency asking me not to go public, the cruise line's PR manager apologizing with a script that sounded like a poet forced to speak insurance clauses. The community, small but loud, began to take sides. My neighbors murmured in dutiful sympathies. The press made a small spectacle, but nothing that would end the world. Ethan's voice, when I heard it, had the margin of panic you hear in a man who suddenly discovers he miscalculated the gravity of a small cruelty. "Dad," he said once, voice breaking on the edge of shame and arrogance combined. "This has become a huge deal. Maybe can we talk in person?" There it was again, that move where men ask for proximity when their illusions collapse. I could have met him. That would have been the line the world expected, the elder father forgiving the wayward son. But I had learned, in 2 weeks' tide, that presence matters and apology without responsibility is the soulless shape of a postcard. Instead, I asked Marissa to set a meeting through her office. If Ethan wanted to negotiate, he would do it on paper, with witnesses. The legal world is slow, but it teaches you a small mercy. Documentation makes liars smaller. I felt infinitely tired, but also awake in a way younger men once told me they felt on the first day of their own power. During those days, I began also to learn truth not from lawyers, but from small neighborhoods. An acquaintance of Ethan's from childhood, a woman named Nora who knew both of us through a barbecue circuit of suburban summers, sent me a message with a voice like a confession. "Ethan, been odd," she wrote. She told me stories I'd never wanted to know. The way he bought expensive things and then returned them. The way he lied about debts and about a hole in his bank account. It was, to me, a little earthquake in a life built of polite veneers. My daughter Kate found copies of bank transfers in a shared family account that did not reconcile with Ethan's salary, funds that moved like tides, leaving behind questions. Marissa took these dots and made a constellation. She had a way of speaking to auditors and accountants that made even the most slippery numbers start to look like confession. She file-flagged certain transfers as suspicious, asked for accounting audits. The more we looked, the more the pattern emerged. Ethan had been moving money between accounts in a way that suggested a plan not unlike the one he performed at the pier. A hiding of assets, a shifting of titles, a slow erasure of obligations in his favor. I remember the day we discovered the invoice. It was small and cunning, a charge to an entity I had never heard of, Seabrook Investments, listed as payment for travel, administrative fees. The date aligned with a dinner booking Ethan had made and then cancelled. The same firm had ties, after a bit of trotting through public records, to a business Ethan had started and then misrepresented in tax filings. It is almost comical how the criminal imagination can be so domestic. A man hides his slippered plan behind invoices and cheerful logos and trusts. No one will see that a father's gift can be repurposed. When I confronted Ethan through the mediated, witness-laden meeting, he looked like a man who had borrowed someone else's face. He tried first the charm, then excuses, then anger. "It was a practical joke," he said at one point, with such bad timing the words hung in the air like a sense of unused humor. "Dad, your age, we thought." This was never the conversation of an adult. It was a theater built of slurs and the expectation that the older man should be grateful for any mention. Marissa had a stack of documentation. Nora came and sat like a witness from a court drama. "It wasn't a joke," she said quietly, and the weight of her voice made Ethan small. "Evidence is a truer thing than a man's argument." The meeting produced not resolution but emotion. Ethan was to provide bank statements, a line-by-line breakdown of the transfers his mother and I could not explain. We demanded the travel agency correct their records and post a public apology. We demanded that Ethan's financial moves be frozen until clarification. The law moves like a glacier, and we had decided to let their slow weight crush the lies. What followed was the kind of low-crammed fury that mends nothing but moves everything. Ethan lashed out. He sent me a message full of bitter thumbnails, accusations that I'd always favored our daughter, that I'd never understood him. He accused me of being controlling. He attacked every wound where old offers of love were thin. "You're trying to ruin me," he wrote. It stung less than his earlier neglect. The louder it was, the smaller the man sounded. But there were also moments, thin and brittle, where every man's weakness shows its face. At 3 a.m., I received a voicemail from Ethan's teenage son, my grandson, begging me to call because Ethan had been drinking and swearing he'd lost it all. The message was half garbled, filled with the terrified earnestness of a child who doesn't want to watch a father destroy himself. That message landed like a bell. Somewhere between his greed and his cruelty was a man who had destroyed parts of his own. I felt neither triumph nor pity, but something like a professional categorization. This is a person in need of accountability. We pushed harder. Marissa courted journalists with a surgeon's care. We produced documents, small and immovable, and they made stories out of the paper. The travel blog that had once praised the cruise line for its seamless experience published an exposé. A business reporter wrote about elder mistreatment in the industry. The narrative shifted. Ethan became older in the press cycle, no longer just my son, but a man with public accusations. He grew desperate. One evening, he came to my house and rang my doorbell like someone who had left the map behind. I let him stand on the porch for 10 minutes, letting the breath of the night make his impatience kind. When I finally opened the door, he was a boy again, pleading for a forgiveness that would not come without a willingness to change the ledger. "You don't understand," he said. "I'm in trouble. I took money I thought I could fix, please." The words tasted like rumor and the smell of burnt toast. I kept my voice calm and cold. "Do you want me to help you, Ethan? Help requires honesty." He broke down then, small and thin, and confessed elements of a debt spiral I had half suspected and half hoped wasn't true. It was a life of vanity lived under the fiction of whitened smiles. I listened until he ran out of breath. Then I told him the one thing I'd been unwilling to say earlier. "I will help, but on the record. We will put accountants in. You will not hide this, and you will not try to erase me from your life for convenience or profit." He nodded like a child learning rules. The relief in his face was immediate and incomprehensible. "I'll do it," he said. We set conditions. He signed paperwork allowing auditors access to his accounts. He agreed to a mediation process monitored by family counsel. Those measures were less about punishment and more about constructing boundaries. People often conflate justice with cruelty. I did not. I wanted the liar to be capable of truth. For his son, Leela, and for the rest of us, that started with transparency. Then, in a last breach that smelled of old men's fear, Ethan called the ship's PR desk and demanded his family's pictures be removed. He called the travel agency to complain. He claimed slander. The media had been kind and ferocious in measured doses, a pincer that had begun to shape his reality. I watched it happen. When the network of excuses collapsed into the rawness of numbers and documents, it did not humiliate a man so much as force him to become human. Which is to say, it freed those of us he'd tried to render optional. 2 weeks later, a mediator called a settlement conference. There would be money exchanged. Yes, the travel agency would pay back fees and provide a public apology, but the greater exchange was the agreement. Ethan would be accountable, an external oversight put on his finances, therapy recommended, and a public note of contrition published in the local paper. We were not exacting petty revenge. We were constructing a repair that required witnesses. As the summer moved on toward the long glare of late July, I felt the strange mixture of being tired and oddly unburdened. The law had not healed everything, nor had it made family easy. But 2 weeks of careful pressure had manufactured a reality where my small dignity could live again in the public record. The seaside postcards would be less tainted. The photos Ethan posted from the ship read, now like the rivalries of two men who had to learn to be honest. The final act came on a humid August morning, that miserable golden kind when the air sits like a wet blanket and the city smells of heat and fried food. We scheduled a formal hearing in the local small claims court. The travel agency's lawyers and their PR people arrived like a phalanx of corporate easement. Ethan, thin in the face and hollow in the eyes, sat in the back with his son. He had been served with the added consequence of public accountability. The mediated terms had been published on a local news feed, and his hands trembled as though the reality of it would seep into his skin. I sat in the plaintiff's seat with Marissa beside me, her expression like a clinical compass, steady, true. My voice was not loud. I had saved theatricality for moments when I wanted the world to notice. This was not one of them. The docket called names, and we responded with paperwork. The judge, an old woman who smelled faintly of tobacco and the river, and who had the sort of eyes that had seen nearly everything in her bench years, asked what we sought. A public apology, restitution for misrepresentation, and fees for emotional damages, Marissa said plainly. The document we placed on the bench was a collage of texts, timestamps, signatures, and the tiny architecture of proving what had happened. The hearing was not what movies make it. There were no slow reveals. There were witnesses who were weary and compassionate, press people who took notes, and a young clerk who stamped the papers with a rubber smear like a primitive drum. But the effect was cumulative. The judge read. She listened to Ethan's voice when he attempted to explain, the voice that tried to transform cruelty into a prank and finally stumbled into truth. The judge gave her ruling, an ordering of terms and public remarks that made Ethan's name and actions part of the public record. She told him, in a way only a benchwoman can, that memory is a communal thing and that erasure is theft. What struck everyone, oddly, was not the money. The travel agency agreed to reimburse, and additional fees were awarded, but the transcript of Ethan's message, where he boasted about how easy it would be to keep me home that summer. It read in the court file like an indictment of a certain cruelty. The paper did not create compassion, it created recognition. The judge noted that while no criminal charge was present, the matter stood as a civic lesson. As we left, cameras were there. I saw in the faces of strangers the reflection of an old man who had not been written off. People said things, "So proud of you," said a woman my age who'd once called the travel agent for advice. A few neighbors came forward, a small, awkward pride in their eyes, as though our small fight had become a communal lesson about how we treat our elders. Ethan did not protest that day. He left in a sedan that smelled faintly of cologne and defeat. He later apologized in an op-ed he published, a short, brittle thing with the bones of contrition and nothing of humility. He wrote about pressure and poor choices. He did not, and probably could not in honesty, fully admit the depth of his betrayal. But in the weeks that followed, he slowly started to attend therapy and attend meetings with the financial oversight. His businesses were audited. His son came around, fragile but steady, and began to reach for normal again. For my part, the settlement money did two things. It replaced my lost trip, and it paid for the little things I'd neglected in the hum of life. Repairs to the porch, a new roof that had been whispering its need for years, and a trip to the coast with my granddaughter Leela, a much smaller affair, no balcony suites, but laughter that tasted like childhood. I bought her a pair of seashells, and we made tracks on the wet sand. The sea did not care about my legal victories, but its steady song washed away the stress of a summer where family had been a political war. People ask me if the $48,000 meant nothing then, that it could be scraped into legal fees. I tell them this: money can buy pleasure and it can buy leverage. Sometimes the two are the same thing. I had wanted the sea, yes. I had also wanted not to be erased. The lawsuit was not a shrine to vindictiveness, but a declaration. You will not treat me as if I can be erased, with a two-line lie. Months after the hearing, we rebuilt what could be rebuilt. Ethan and I had lunches where we met with a mediator and talked about the things I'd once thought too small to mention: birthdays missed, jokes that strung, the ways pride had chimed through him like glass. We did not fix everything. This was not a tidy story of reconciliation. It was messy, like the summer itself, hot, wet, full of the small salvage of things that matter. He called more often. He showed up at family events sober and alert. Therapy helped, and sometimes it didn't, but the ledger was clear. Years later, I tell the story at neighborhood barbecues and in the quiet of a kitchen that smells like basil. People lean close and ask the same question: did it change you? I think of the bench on the pier lit with a hard sun. I think of my granddaughter and her profuse drawings, and the way a small hand can fix the anger in a chest with a single purple doodle. I breathe and say that I am older now but not lesser, that summer taught me a very sharp kindness. Boundaries matter. You suffer, and you also must ensure you are seen. 2 summers after the pier, Ethan and I planned a small, deliberate trip to a bed and breakfast on the coast. It was not a cruise. It was a table with 2 cups of tea and a shared blanket. We walked on a quieter pier, and he apologized in the sort of voice that finally held shape, not a theatrical thing, but honest, bruised. I accepted the apology in the same way I accepted the tide. It has its rhythms, it comes and goes. We are better now, not perfect, but present. And sometimes, when the sunlight catches the water the way it used to in my brochure, I feel my earlier promise, the one I bought with $48,000, fold into something else entirely. A small piece that comes from being visible, demanding visibility and saying, "No man will erase my name from his summer." Not with a text, not with a joke, not with an indifferent shrug. If you want to leave me, say it plainly, but do not try to make the world pretend you did not.